Welcome to this week's Religion Media Centre briefing, which is on the subject, does religious studies prepare students for diversity at work? And we'll be talking to people from various professions on how important religious literacy is in the workplace and their opinion on whether young people entering the workforce are prepared for what greets them in the office. We'll also be talking to the authors of a report that's just come out promoting the exploration of religion and worldviews in schools, fostering coherency and diversity. And this is on the current state of religious studies and the proposals to change its name and content reflecting the changes in society. And it's the report author, Dr. Suzanne Newcombe, will be joining us to explain that. And I think, Suzanne, we'll go to you first. We'll come to all the other speakers in time, but just to kick us off, could you talk to us about this report, very long title, Promoting the Exploration of Religion and Worldviews in Schools? Can you tell us a little bit about why it was written and what it was hoped it would achieve?
Yeah, sure. So this was a collaborative 18-month research project between myself at the Open University and the Religious Studies Department, the Faith and Belief Forum, and Inform, which is based at King's College London. And we all came together because we share an interest in promoting high-quality education and understanding of religion and all of its diversity. And we got funding from Column St. Gabriel's to explore how religion is viewed by people outside the classroom. So we were looking at, and religious education specifically. So we're looking at people who aren't religious education teachers or involved professionally with providing religious education, but how are these, how is what's going on viewed by the key stakeholders, which we looked at community interest groups, the SACRAs, the Standing Advisory Councils on Religious Education, parents, school leadership, academies, academics and policy professionals, as well as doing some desk research in terms of previous reports, media coverage of religious education in general, and the Religion and Worldviews proposal specifically.
What did you find about the current state of religious education?
So we found a few problems highlighted and also some quite positive commonalities between all these different groups. So the problems will probably be familiar to a lot of people in these fields. There's a lot of structural issues. There's a diversity of contents and exam syllabuses, an ambiguity of the subject status and its importance for a lot of schools. There's a lack of alignment with the university level ways of approaching religion and theology. And there's also a lack of specialist teachers and resources in a lot of schools. And sometimes it's just a lack of awareness of what good resources are out there, again, because people are pressed for time. A second problem was about the public perception of religion. To some extent, this includes religious education. But when the aims and purposes of religious education are explained in more detail, people were generally quite positive about the importance of religious education. So there's a kind of mix up between anxiety about religion in general and possible negative attitudes towards that, and then also a real warmth towards the social cohesion aspects and potential of reflecting on moral and ethical frameworks that religious education, when taught well, does excellently.
And the report also looked, it says it explored religion and worldviews in schools. Now, I know we've got a lot of RE teachers on the call, and that worldviews is a word that we come across, is looked about a lot. But what does it actually mean?
Well, this actually is the third problem that was kind of highlighted in the report, and it's about the conceptual issues, about having greater clarity about what's being taught and why. And in terms of worldviews, there's been a lot written extensively on this. Trevor Cooling, who authored the Religion and Worldviews, has his own perspective. The Independent Schools Religious Studies Association is also on this call, and they've equated it largely as a secular category. However, other colleagues I've spoken to have really highlighted the underlying Christian and kind of colonialist assumptions that worldview has. And quite a few of the participants in our focus groups interpret it as just adding atheism and humanism rather than being a way of signifying that everyone has a unique history, a disciplinary perspective, and there's a diversity of theological phenomenological lived perspectives of human experience that can be encompassed. So I think it's an interesting umbrella term just to shift the conversation along, but I don't think we'll find any more agreement about what exactly a worldview is than we do about what exactly is religion and what is not religion.
So why is it being promoted if no one really knows what it is?
It's a way of changing the paradigm, and some others on this call are much more involved with articulating this than me, but it's a way of changing the paradigm to incorporate a lot of those people who, on the one hand, a lot of those people who have different kinds of personal and institutional affiliation, the diversity of, it's a way of incorporating the diversity within mainstream traditions, acknowledging that all Christians do not necessarily believe and practice exactly the same thing, and the same goes true for all the other main faiths. But also a lot of those who have might identify as none actually have a quite complex relationship to ethics and traditional world religions, and reflecting on where we come from and how these experiences and engagements with institutions and communities that are traditionally associated with religions continues to inform our ethical frameworks as a society and our ethical frameworks as individuals. For me, it kind of encompasses all this area.
We're going to pick that up a bit later. Thanks very much for introducing the report. But I just want to pick up one aspect to it. I was quite struck when reading it that the report makes a lot of reference to people believing that the practical role for religious education is social cohesion and religious literacy. Those were the main outcomes. And I'd like to turn now, if I could, to our lawyer and our journalist who are joining us from the world of work to talk to us about religious literacy in the workplace and the connections that you can see between the kind of knowledge that people have to have in your various professions and what you see with the young people coming into it now. Amardeep Bassey, can I go to you first? So you're a journalist and also a journalist trainer and at De Montfort University in Leicester, and you've worked, I know, in the Midlands as a journalist for many years. Can you just tell us something about the importance of religious literacy in a newsroom? How important is it that the young people that you're training to be journalists have some knowledge of religion? What kind of knowledge do you think they should have?
I think it's very important, and certainly, you know, I studied. I was very interested in religious education throughout my school years. I did an A-level in religious education, which turned out to be an A-level in theology, which I didn't realise at the time when I took the option. I thought it was going to be world religions. It turned out to be theology. But apart from just learning about, you know, different religions and different worldviews, as we're talking about, where it really kind of helped me, generally, I suppose, and I think, again, is a good skill for journalists, is that element of inquiry, that element of wanting to know about other people's beliefs, where they come from, and the analytical side of it. I found, you know, the analysis required to study religious education, it isn't just learning about religions, it is inquiry, it is analysing, it is finding out, well, where has this belief come from, and the analysis behind it. So in that context, I think it's a very good skill for journalists to have through studying religion. On a practical level, certainly, you know, diversity is a buzzword in journalism, just like it is in a lot of industries. And certainly, you know, the ethnic makeup of this country is changing every day. And to be a journalist, you should know a little about everything. You know, journalists aren't expected to know about everything, but we should know where to find out about things that we don't know about ourselves. And so, you know, being able to communicate with people from other religions, have contacts within other religions, chances are the communities that you'll be reporting on will have a wide diversity of religion. And I think most importantly, it gives certainly young journalists that confidence to be able to go into communities that maybe they, you know, don't particularly identify with, but have that kind of inquiring attitude, rather than feeling so out of their depth that they say, for instance, they go into a Muslim community, they don't know much about Islam, they will be very shy. They will take everything that's said to them as gospel. Mixing my religions there, but they won't be able to push back in any way, or be able to say, well, I actually understand this to be part of your belief, and so you won't have that analysis and critique that you might have with somebody who knows a little about a few religions, and so it certainly has that entry level to know basic Islam, basic Sikhism, Judaism, etc., etc. So certainly for young journalists, I think it's incredibly important.
What's your experience when you have trained journalists up and young people come to you straight, first job, school, university, course, they come to you?
Yeah.
From this report suggests that there are failings in how religious education is delivered. Are you finding there are great gaps in knowledge? Are there things that you would have expected them to know?
Yeah, I think the biggest gap is, and I've heard this from a number of young journalists, again, when I did RE, we're talking about 20 years ago, is that they don't know much about world religions. They thought RE was going to be about religions across the world, but it seems to have a very narrow focus. Maybe that's just the students I've spoken to.
What you mean, just Christianity, Judaism?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the sort of big three, I suppose: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And so they don't have that all-round view of different religions across this, and particularly the subcontinent. And certainly when we're talking about the UK, there are a lot of religions and the nuances between religions. Within Hinduism, you have different sects, for want of a better word, and the little nuances. Which and what I say as far as training young journalists is, it's through those nuanced understanding is where you will find the stories. By knowing that there is not just one form of Sikhism, or knowing that there's not just one form of Islam, that's where you will find these untold stories that we're always being told to go and find these days, that, we need to find these hidden communities. Well, you've got to have some kind of basic knowledge of what these hidden communities are that you're looking for.
Right, interesting. Thanks very much, Amardeep. And Frank Cranmer, a lawyer by trade and training, and a contributor to us as well. I mean, you're in quite a niche market there, Frank, because there aren't many lawyers who specialise in religion, but you do. But after a kind of lifetime of experience as a lawyer, can I ask you the same question as I put to Amardeep? What are the kind of requirements that you would seek as a lawyer in the profession when you have young people entering the profession? What information, what knowledge, what understanding do you hope that they would have?
Well, my bit of it is fairly specialised in that my engagement with youngish people is to teach on an LLM course in law and religion. But I think that the basic criterion for any lawyer who gets involved in religious issues, and they can crop up in any kind of practice, is a sensitivity to the range of religion. It's not all about Christianity, particularly it's not all about any specific version of Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism. It's about all of them across the board. It's also about non-religious belief. Because if you go back to the Equality Act 2010, it talks about religion meaning any religion, and reference to religion includes a reference to a lack of religion. And belief means any religious or philosophical belief, and a reference to a belief includes a reference to a lack of belief. So it's meant to protect religion and belief across the board, just as Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights does.
In practical terms, when a lawyer is meeting a client, I've heard doctors say, for example, that a knowledge of religion is essential. During COVID, they were telling us that there was a real need to understand funeral practices, for example, something practical like that. What are the practical things that a lawyer needs to know about religion in order to succeed at work?
In a sense, you must ask a practicing lawyer, which I'm not, I'm an academic. But for example, if you're a lawyer and you practice in areas such as trusts and wills and succession, and a chunk of your clientele are Muslim, you at least need to have a nodding acquaintance with the rules of Sharia law, because practicing Muslim clients will expect their testamentary dispositions to be done in accordance with the dictates of their faith. And they're complex and difficult, and not like perhaps the way an atheist or an agnostic would expect to draw up a will. And if the lawyer doing it doesn't know, he'd better find someone who does, or he'll make a muck of it.
Yeah, well, interesting. And there are so many internal training courses now that you come across through, I think Tesco's and Marks and Spencer's on food, for example, and supplementing the knowledge of the workforce. So thanks very much. Do jump back in. But can I turn now to Stephen Pett? Hope you're on the call somewhere, not on gallery view. Stephen, you are a National RE Advisor at RE Today. Can I ask you some particular questions, having heard those two interviews, one with a lawyer, one with a journalist, of what they're looking for in young recruits to the profession? One thing I picked up from this report is that the curriculum is all over the place, it seemed to me. It was like a kind of, I don't know if I'm misrepresenting what is going on out there, but there are different examples, different curriculums. People can pick different subjects. There's no way of knowing that when you emerge from a school, you've got certain basic information about certain topics. It's very pick and mix. Am I right in that, Stephen?
That might be a slight mischaracterization, slightly more negative than I might like to say. I mean, there isn't a national curriculum in the way there is for other subjects. That the curriculum is locally determined, and so a local authority, a SACRE, a Standing Advisory Council on RE, will develop a syllabus. But I mean, although there's local determination and that there are lots of syllabuses around the country, there's a lot of unanimity across them in terms of which religions might be studied and the kinds of things that might be studied. So I think there's a bit more unanimity than you might imply. Although the challenge is that the teaching of it in schools is not always supported in the way that the RE community might like. Schools don't always give it the time that it requires. Teachers aren't necessarily specialists, they don't necessarily have the support in order to be able to deliver high quality lessons. So there are still challenges with the subject.
The report lists various opinions from all the focus groups who were interviewed. I think the Faith and Belief Forum was involved in all of that, Suzanne, in the actual, process. And everyone seems to have a different idea about what religious education is, Stephen, and what it should achieve. So being good was one phrase that stuck out at me. I couldn't believe that anyone actually said it. There's a lot to hang on an RE teacher if you're training a child to be good. And then social cohesion, religious literacy, we've spoken about before, inclusion, recognition of diversity, it all rests on religious education. How much of a problem is it that there is no one mission statement of what religious education is?
I think that it's obviously it's a real challenge for RE teachers. I think part of the reason why there's such this diversity of aims and purposes for the subject is a little bit to do with the sense of insecurity that when something new comes along, social cohesion or British values, then RE is saying, well, look, we can deal with that sort of thing. That might be part of our subject, as sort of trying to protect itself from people thinking that it's that there shouldn't be RE anymore. So part of it is that this idea there are lots of different aims. I think that I don't know that there needs to be a single particular goal. I think that it's a rich subject that deals with all sorts of aspects of human experience, and so it might have multiple impacts, if you like. But I think that clarity wouldn't do it any harm.
Perhaps that's your next task, Suzanne. But I would like to hear from other religious education teachers on the call. I mean, there are a number of people here who haven't joined us before. So if you've got a question, do put it in the chat box and do join the discussion. But could I turn next to Michael Wilcockson and go back to the idea of worldviews? So, Michael, just to get your title right, you are representing the views of the Independent Schools Religious Studies Association, and you've put together a formal response to the various documents and proposals that there have been to change the name of religious studies to Religion and Worldviews. I wonder, as you've been listening to the discussion, to ask you for your reflection on what you've heard and your objection, really, to the moves to change the name.
Well, we had already had a very rich discussion which probably reflects the same discussion we've been having for as long as I've been teaching, it's about 40 years or so. So there's nothing new about all this. What is new, of course, is the way society has moved, and that in itself has put, as Stephen's just said, various demands on us in terms of the subject. That's always been the case, hasn't it? I mean, I always think people used to refer to RE as a Cinderella subject. Well, if Cinderella's going to go to the ball, she better have something to wear, so she dons the latest sort of fads and what's going on. There's nothing essentially that Suzanne has said that we disagree with. What we disagree with is that worldviews is itself confusing, and popiotios as a notion. And I think we are suspicious, if I can apply that, in terms of what it will let in, which is what we're not particularly, we don't care for. I think it is that whenever you, as a religious studies teacher, teaches a religious idea, it's inevitable one's going to talk about non-religious ideas, and we don't need to label that particularly as worldviews. It's there. It always has been. What we do think it is a fairly forceful members of the community, and notably a sort of secularizing humanist faction, which we feel is like the cuckoo trying to get into the nest, and therefore to reduce the religious ideas, the religious thinking, the theological thinking that goes with it, to become less significant. We have precious little time as it is, if we're then going to appropriate a different way of thinking.
What's the difference between religion or in religious studies and, say, studying humanism or atheism or describing it as a worldview? Is it that you think that religious studies should basically be about God?
Well, that's a big assumption. Buddhism doesn't talk about God particularly. Various parts of Hinduism doesn't talk about God as such. No, I think what we're talking about is the sense of the other, which, if you wanted to characterize religion, is putting humans into a context of feeling as something greater than oneself. And because it's greater than oneself, that is not just merely being human. I mean, it is being human, but it's more than that. And in fact, that is the investigation. That is what the purpose is.
But humanism and atheism, does that take you outside yourself?
Well, as I said, we discussed these things in order to clarify. I don't think you need to nominate it as a particular area that has to be discussed. After, if you want a humanist studies, you can go and do it. I'd be very interested to know what a humanist curriculum would look like as well.
You say in the report that you've written as well that Christianity deserves a privileged place on the curriculum. The curriculum should promote a sense of British values, common purpose, and build a community resilience and a willingness to sacrifice for the common good. Could you achieve that without a privileged place for Christianity, do you think?
Putting it very simply, it's acknowledging our history and our culture. And even if one's not particularly Christian, and lots of people aren't, of course, there is a tradition which has been absorbed into various philosophical and political ideas, which is indebted to that Christian tradition. Obviously, the report doesn't necessarily reflect what I think, but it is trying to reflect broadly what our members think in terms of the kind of schools that we represent, many of which, of course, have a faith-based tradition to them.
Thank you, Michael. Just to widen the discussion out again and pick up one of the points that Suzanne was talking about earlier, which was the negative perception of religious education. And that's all bound up with the lack of curriculum time. Gemma, do you want to ask your question in person that you put in the chat box?
I find it incredibly difficult. I feel like I'm banging my head against a wall. I have one GCSE group in years 10 and in year 9 currently. Unfortunately, I was off with long COVID, so next year I've got no year 9 GCSE group, when I know that students would have loved to have taken it. The core element of our kids, they have one lesson a fortnight, and there is no way that I can fulfil any statutory guidance or any advice from the SACRE, and I find it so disheartening to be fighting all the time, not having specialist teachers that, you know, I provide the work for, but they can't give that enhanced knowledge. They can't give the little stories and things like that. And I just feel that I'm hoping that the Ofsted review is going to push, because I've been asked to go to a meeting next week to discuss the future, but I just don't know what other support is available. I see on social media all the time, teachers and other heads of department are in exactly the same position. I don't know what else we can do.
Do you think that a report like this that says if you change the name, it would help? It would help people understand how important the subject was. Do you think that's correct?
My previous school and we were part of the Goldsmiths University research that went into changing, finding the information and changing to religion and worldviews. I believe it's a really, really good thing, because I think a lot of students and parents misinterpret, when you call it RE, religious studies, they misinterpret what you're actually doing in lessons, what you're discussing, the types of topics that come up. The students, the young people, if it is delivered in a way that is relevant to 2022, are really interested. They want to have their say. Sometimes it's the only safe space in school where they can express their ideas, ask questions. If you come from an atheist family, you don't often have discussions around the table about life after death, for example. So if a child then loses a grandparent, they've got lots of questions surrounding that, and they want to explore it. And I think the RW classroom is the perfect place to do that. But you've got to have subject-specific staff. You can't have, I've got a PE teacher delivering it currently. He doesn't want to do it. You can't have those in-depth conversations. It can be so rich and rewarding for the staff and the students if it's done properly.
Thank you. Suzanne, do you want to pick that up? Because you do make recommendations at the end of the report about how you can address some of these things that you discovered, the challenges for RE at the moment. Apart from the name change, you made other suggestions.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out some of the we've created a set of resources for teachers to present to their heads. I'll put the links in the chat as soon as I finish talking. And we've also done an open learn course to help target and explain to parents some of what should be taught, because sometimes parents think religious education is indoctrination into either Christianity or radical Islam. There's a lot of misunderstandings about it. But also, just a point about the diversity. I think that this can also, the local agreed syllabuses and what we found from all the community groups we engaged with is that actually incorporating local diversity can be a huge resource for the principles of how to deal with the incredible diversity of histories, of perspectives, of the multicultural society that people need to be good employees in what the UK has as an 80% service sector economy. So it's almost as much about how you do it, and incorporating the really enthusiastic local communities is potentially a huge asset that's not being fully utilized within the current framework.
Vanda Dey from the Faith and Belief Forum. You are a community representative. Tell us something about the work that you do. Suzanne was saying that's one of the things that could improve the status of RE, the links with the community.
Yeah, so we do a lot of work with schools. They invite us in to speak about our particular journeys within our faith. And I think that's very different from the general idea that parents might have about religious education. They're definitely not being indoctrinated in a particular religion. One's talking about one's own journey within their faith and how it may have changed over time. And I feel that's really valuable for children because they have so many questions, which they, like mentioned earlier, that they may not ask at home or not get an opportunity to ask. One of the popular questions is what happens to us after death, and hearing all the different views from different faith groups really helps them with that. And they're so inquisitive. They ask these bigger questions of life that they may not necessarily get in other subject matters. So I feel it's a really important thing. We go into schools, we meet the children, and they see that we're different people. Like, it's a safe space to understand that there are different people in the world that follow different practices, and that we can all still work in the same environment and get along and be happy. So I feel like it brings a lot of unity together. It really gets the children thinking. When I was at school, RE was never about having open discussions. It was just the teacher teaching a particular religion. But I feel that's evolved in 2022. It's more about having discussions with your classroom friends about different perspectives of life through religion and through non-religious subject matters also. So I feel like it's been very valuable. I feel like I've learned a lot about other religions from the other speakers as well. So it's definitely opened up my mind quite a lot.
I'd like to bring in Carrie in a moment as well, but also I know specifically with John Michaelis from the Faith and Belief Forum, you've also done some similar work. Can you just tell us something about the work that you've been involved in?
Again, it's very similar to Vanda. We get invited in to schools to talk about growing up with our religion, talk a bit about our religion and the practices, but also about how it's affected our lives, you know, how the impacts it's had on various life events, like when we get married or the way we deal with our children, and also some other interactions. What I find most striking to me, over and above the things that Vanda said, was when I get questions from children, and this can be 14, 15-year-olds, that sort of about, well, how did you feel about that? Or these are genuine questions I've had. Or what are your thoughts on the religion your grandchildren should follow? That demonstrates to me that it stimulated the members of the class that we're talking to actually critically analyse what we're saying and think about, so what does that mean in terms of potentially their life or the life of people around them? And I think it's, to my mind, that balance between talking about how one's practiced one's religion and how one's lived your lifestyle over here and the impacts it's had, that I think really focuses the children's minds on asking these analytical questions and reflecting on their own background and how they perhaps would want to live their lives or how they'd feel about these religious on their life going forward.
Thank you. Is there anyone, and we've got lots of people on from the Faith and Belief Forum, but which one of you would like to take some questions on just explaining something about this work of the two people who've just spoken and the project that that's part of and your ambitions with it? Carrie, will you take
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, brilliant to hear from John and Vanda there. So John and Vanda have been working with us on our Encountering Faith and Belief workshops. So these are workshops where we go into schools and our trained volunteer speakers bring the story of their own faith and cultural identity. And yeah, it's brilliant to hear from them as practitioners, you know, what kind of strength that brings to the learning experience in terms of really hearing that from community members. And I want to take this opportunity to just push back a little bit on this framing of religion and worldviews as a change of name, because I think that actually what it represents is kind of a pedagogical shift in the way that we view the teaching of religion in schools. And what it does is it introduces an approach which helps students to analyse their own view towards their identity and culture and religion, and then use that as a lens to look at other people's culture and religion. So it really offers the opportunity to kind of build empathy and understanding across barriers of difference. So this is part of our vision for our Encountering Faith and Belief workshops and all of our work in schools, really, is that we see this as the best way to teach religion holistically, is by really doing it through the voices of people who are of faith, rather than kind of stereotyping what one group of practitioners believes.
Could anyone answer a question about the rules in all of this? Is anyone allowed to go into a school and talk about their faith? Are there any rules around proselytizing?
So we personally have a very strict training that we go through with our volunteers, and we work with them on their stories. Absolutely, for us, it's not about proselytizing, it's about someone sharing their own personal experience. And in fact, some of our speakers, you know, perhaps were brought up in a religious background and are no longer practicing. It's really about their own experience with their faith and culture. So I think that good extracurricular religious studies work in schools, you know, definitely you need to work with our speakers and work with them to develop their stories, work with them to develop their approach, especially for the different age groups that they're talking to as well.
Suzanne, just to picking that up, in one of your conclusions, you say that this is something that could be really encouraged in the future, that all schools should be encouraged to contact local community groups and create links and so forth to help with the delivery of religious education. How big an impact would you hope that that would have for the future of the subject?
Well, like Carrie was suggesting, I think it's more of it's less about prescriptive lists of content and more about an approach to dealing with this diversity. And it also comes back to the training of RE teachers and resourcing them, because you can't just let anyone talk in schools, but you need to have some sense of the landscape, how to ask the right questions and how to contextualize things for students. And it doesn't mean you have to know everything, because there's often a great fear that came up in a lot of the focus groups of like, oh, we can't just handle, we're already trying to cover 6 or 8 different faiths. We can't handle adding non-religions and one more thing. But it's not about adding one more thing. It's about practical ways of dealing with the really complex and diverse landscape, both intellectually and practically in our society today.
We're faced with a picture now, Suzanne, of religious education. There's a negative perception about it. There are not enough trained teachers. The curriculum is all over the place. There is no one single mission statement. There's a disagreement about what to do with its with the challenges that it faces. And I'm wondering, it'd be good to have views from people on the call, what you think the answer is. I don't know, Tim Hutchings at Nottingham, whether you'd like to open up. I don't know if you're in a position to take part in this as well. What is the solution to what happens? You've suggested several at the end of your report, Suzanne. Is there a kind of silver bullet here that will promote the subject back to its former glory?
I don't know that there's a silver bullet, but I think one of the really positives that came through was that there's a huge engagement, and like Gemma was saying, I think that students, when we did our student surveys, those who had good RE teaching, it was often one of the favorite subjects and a place where they could express themselves and explore things that were personally valuable to them that they didn't find elsewhere in their school experience. And even if institutional religiosity is declining, it doesn't mean that people's engagement with meaning and purpose to life, with ethical frameworks of right and wrong, about what behaviors should and shouldn't be done, is any less relevant now. And how we're teaching religion and its transformations in the contemporary world needs to reflect all that. And there's a great enthusiasm for that. It's just about articulating it clearly in a way that isn't too, that is inclusive and not too scary for all the different people who have really passionate interest in the subject and need to be part of the conversation.
Michael, can I bring you back in? In the last page of your report, recommendations, you list 5 things that could happen. Things that have happened that need to be changed in order to improve the status of religious studies. Could you just outline what those are for us, please?
So I haven't actually got the report in front of me, but what I think we were suggesting is that what we want is a higher sort of academic content in terms of rigor. I mean, all the sort of things we've been talking about so far, really. I don't think there's anything exclusive about what we've suggested. But what we would like is a clearer sort of distinction between sort of theology, religion, philosophy, taught in their own right and in relationship to each other. I'm interested in this whole discussion, if I can just say this very quickly, I don't think there's anything fundamental we would disagree with. I don't think anything that fundamentally any of us disagree with. I think a lot of it's to do with time. I personally lament the demise of short courses in Gcse and the AS level. I think they've made major dents in what we're doing, both in sort of Key Stage 4 and above. I think those gave people a lot of enthusiasm and structure and framework. The notion of teaching a subject in diversity, a religion itself is diverse, is plural. None of this is new. I fail to see at the moment what we're saying that is stunningly new in the present context. I think what is new is that we're worried. We're worried that the time given and the support given and the perception, dare one say it, from Department for Education and so on is not supportive. Those are the real areas, I think, of concern. So I would hate to think after this meeting that somehow that we are in fundamental disagreement with anybody who's spoken so far. Ruth, I don't know if that covers all our aims, but that's in essence what I think we have to say.
Yes, thank you. And I've got Tim Hutchings wanted to come in now from Nottingham University.
Hi, so I'm the admissions tutor in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at Nottingham University. And Ruth just said out loud that RE A-level doesn't count, which completely knocked me out because I had to go away and do some research and figure out what on earth that was about. That is not true. Do not tell anybody that. That is absolutely untrue. The Russell Group list of universities produced something called a list of facilitating subjects a few years ago. That was not a list of the A-levels that count. It was supposed to remind students that some degrees at university have certain required A-levels. So if you want to do physics, there might be a required A-level. If you want to do history, there might be a required A-level. And they just came up with a list of which subjects are most likely to be required. And it was horribly misunderstood, particularly by people, by schools and parents and pupils who thought, oh, so RE doesn't count. And the whole list was scrapped like 3 years ago because of this misunderstanding. So yes, RE counts just like every other A-level.
So the list has been scrapped. So just to clarify that,
yes, it never meant
there
that.
are no facilitating subjects anymore.
As far as I can find out, I've been looking into this to try and see if there's another thing that you might be referring to, but I think you mean the list that was scrapped.
Right.
RE is a great A-level, just like all other A-levels, and certainly if you want to do a theology and religious studies degree, we would love to see that. We would certainly accept that. So a few comments I can make from my perspective as admissions tutor. One, I was interested to hear what Michael said, I think, if I heard it right, that he would like to see theology, philosophy taught in their own right, which is fine. But if you go to university and you do a degree in theology and religious studies, that's probably not what you're going to get. You're going to get a multidisciplinary, rich, contemporary subject that includes theology and philosophy and the study of ancient texts and the study of different world religions, perhaps, and the study of probably indigenous religions and new religions and other things. And it will include sociology and social sciences and human sciences. There might be some anthropology, there might be some languages. You might well get some study of art and culture included as well. It's a broad subject. What I really like about the religion and worldviews approach is that it challenges schools, or maybe celebrates schools. I think we should not overstate the problems with RE. Perhaps there are lots of great things already going on in RE in schools at the moment. It celebrates those schools that are teaching RE or religious studies in a multidisciplinary way and are already introducing students to social scientific approaches that focus on individuals and their worldviews and religion as part of society. One thing you'll almost certainly do at university is take some courses in atheism and non-religion. I'm sorry to break this to Michael, who's worried about the cuckoo in the nest. It's been in the nest for 40 years. Universities employ people who specifically focus on the study of non-religions, atheism, all sorts of things that don't fit into the old world religions paradigm. You're probably going to do courses on that at university. Why would you not want to start doing that at school? Prepare students early on for how interesting a university degree could be with all of these things included in it. I think the religion and worldviews approach does that very well. I also think, again, right across the board, what people have been saying, the crucial problem here is the lack of resourcing for school RE. I think the religion and worldviews approach does a good job of reminding people that this is a subject that's relevant to everyone. Everyone has a worldview. That's one of the catchphrases. But what we need is the government to get behind school RE and support training for teachers and proper resourcing for the subject and proper time in the curriculum in every school. And the ISRSA report says that, just like the RE Council report says that, and the core report and all these other reports that we're talking about. Sometimes I think the level of agreement on that crucial issue gets lost a bit behind distractions about the name of the subject. I think it will be great to include worldviews. It would be much better to get bursaries for training RE teachers. I think we all probably agree on that. That's the central point.
Thanks, Tim. And now everyone wants to come back. Michael was first and then Frank.
Just to correct Tim, you misrepresented me, Tim, what I said. there's no harm. I mean, we agree on teaching atheism, we agree on all those sort of things. I think what I meant was that often philosophy is presented at school, and when it's actually just philosophy of religion, what we meant was teaching philosophy in all its diversity and rigorously as philosophy. Of course, it's true at university and it's equally true at school, but we'd like to see it just done with a little bit more academic rigor. Everything else, I mean, I agree on essentially, but just want to correct that point.
Thank you, Frank.
Just to say that all this came up in the High Court in Belfast a fortnight ago. I've put a note in the chat and I've put a reference to my write-up of it, but briefly, parents of a primary school kid in a state school challenged the curriculum on the grounds it was exclusively Christian, and whereas they didn't mind that, they happened to be non-religious and would like to see a broader curriculum. And the court found in their favour. Chances are the Department of Education in Northern Ireland will appeal the decision. It will go to the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal. If the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal upholds it, it'll then basically come back to our government in Westminster, because at the moment, Northern Ireland barely has one. So they're going to go through all the arguments again, and at a very high level. And given that there's a kind of spillover between courts in Scotland, courts in Northern Ireland, and courts in England and Wales, watch this space.
Yes, we should do a plug for your Law and Religion headlines, which is a very good resource for religious education teachers, Frank. So thank you for that. Stephen, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks very much. You asked earlier about the solutions to some of the problems highlighted in Suzanne and others' report, the Insights report. I mean, I haven't got the solutions, but one of the things that the RE Council is working on at the moment, there's a project that I'm working on with some others, and that's about taking the sort of theory of the Religion and Worldviews approach from the Commission report and subsequent materials as well, because the RE Council produced at least 2 more reports since 2018. It's a 3-year project, and we've produced a resource that came out a few weeks ago that tries to set out a little bit more clarity on definitions. It sets out to heart what's called a national statement of entitlement, to try to get some sense of commonality in terms of a benchmark and a means of selecting content. We're currently, that's in a very draft form at the moment. It's been written for 3 framework development teams that are going to test it and try it out in 3 contexts around the country. And then in 18 months' time or so, we'll be producing those 3 framework examples with some accompanying units of work and pupil responses, and what we hope is a more settled view of a statement of entitlement and definitions, and a sort of handbook for a religion and worldviews approach. So those materials are, that thinking is ongoing, and obviously the questions that you've raised today and that the report raises are the sorts of things that we're going to try and again, not the solution, but try to address them and move things forward. So I've put some of those links in the chat. Hopefully they'll be helpful for people.
Thank you. It's a different world, education, isn't it? Meetings and think tanks and reports and so forth. But thank you for explaining it. Can I just pick up what you were saying, Tim, a moment ago about the overriding thing for you? I think you said this, was that you felt that religious education needed more support. And I think everyone was nodding their head at that point, and that's what the report says as well. Can I just ask you and any others who want to chip in, how are you going to achieve that? Where is the block? Who is not listening, and why isn't anything being done? Can anyone shed any light on that?
Well, I was just going to reflect on local authorities, and there was a freedom of information request that came from NASACRE, which said that 53% of local authorities disclosed that they do not use any funds to support RE in schools, and the Department for Education suggested that should be at least 2% of the central services school block. So 53% is quite an incredible number, especially seeing as, as we've heard today, the syllabus is decided at the local level. So I don't have the answer for that. I don't know where that needs to come from, whether that has to come from DfE or us lobbying LAs, but that seems to be one of the central issues, really.
Thank you. Well, we're almost at the end of the hour, so I think I'd leave the last word to Suzanne, wrapping up the report from everything that you've heard today. I wonder if there are any takeaways, particularly thinking right back to the beginning about what Frank and Amardeep were saying about the importance of religious studies in school. What's going to happen now? Just tell us what the next step is.
I think it's about keeping up enthusiasm and involvement and changing the conversation about religion so that the government's clear it is still a subject of interest and importance to employers. It is an interesting, rigorous academic subject that universities value. It does produce the kind of critical thinking and ability to analyze complex information that is really needed for the 21st century and for Britain to be a leading force facing the challenges that face us globally. And so it's very, very much appreciated and a very much needed subject, and the frameworks and support for that need to reflect what's happening in this century rather than the middle of last century.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, particularly all our speakers, but thank you everyone for joining, and hope to see you again at one of these briefings.